All right. Well, this is Brian Johnson, staff writer with Finance and Commerce. Pleased to be joined here with Doug Jaeger, President and CEO of Ulteig, a Twin Cities-based infrastructure engineering, technical services, and consulting firm, which has a milestone anniversary coming up. You're celebrating your 80th anniversary this year, I understand. Is that right, Doug?
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining me and want to talk a little bit about the company's anniversary and your workload and your outlook for the coming year and things of that nature. But I was wondering if I could start out by just asking you to talk a little bit about your company and when it was founded and the industry sectors you serve. You work primarily on infrastructure projects, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah. So we've been, as you say, we are celebrating 80 years. We were founded in 1944. The story goes, our founder, Melvin Ulteig, founded the firm in the basement of his home in Fargo, North Dakota, along with himself and two employees, his wife and a land surveyor. And that began Ulteig to fast forward today where we are. And we're now in we have 1,400 employees across North America. And as you say, we serve the critical infrastructure space. So power, renewable energy, transportation, and water infrastructure.
Just looking on your website, it looks like you have done a number of wind projects, solar, things of that nature. Is that a pretty heavy workload for you guys these days?
Yeah, it is across really all four sectors, but certainly the renewable infrastructure space, the clean energy space is booming. The passage of federal funding dollars to support clean energy infrastructure, but also just the market demand for renewable clean energy resources is significantly impacting the amount of investment going into that space and keeping us extremely busy.
It seems like a lot of that, especially, is going on in sort of the southwest Minnesota. I was just driving my daughter back from, she was doing an internship in South Dakota over the summer, and I picked her up. She's going back to school here now, but just driving from South Dakota, you didn't see much, but then you get into Minnesota and there are wind turbines all over the place. But is that kind of a growth area out there? Have you done much in that part of the state?
Yeah, quite a bit down in southwestern Minnesota, quite a bit in North Dakota and South Dakota. We also do quite a bit of renewable, both wind and solar infrastructure down in the desert southwest and desert south and southwest in Texas and California. It's really scattered, though, quite a bit across the country. The advent of battery storage now alongside solar farms is making the sort of the pragmatic opportunity for solar installations much more geographically agnostic, as long as they're in a place where the sun's shining and they can place them near transmission capability with backup energy storage through battery energy storage. It's happening all across the United States.
And tell us a little bit more about your tenure with the company. How long have you been with Ulteig, and how long in your current role?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I celebrated 9 years here. I joined the company in 2015. And I will just, give this quick backdrop. I've spent about the last 30 years of my career in and around the energy and technical services space. Part of that was spent in the publicly traded Fortune 200 space of Honeywell, Exelon, and Xcel Energy here in town. And then part of it has been in the private side. I pivoted over to Adolfson Peterson and ran Adolfson Peterson for 5 years post recession, 2008 to 2013, a fun time to run a general contracting business. Did a little consulting in the space after that, and then came to Ulteig in 2015. And I'd like to say to my friends that my toughest days at Ulteig are some of my best days of my career. I've had a lot of fun here over the last 9 years.
And what are some of the biggest changes you've seen in your career in this industry?
Yeah, spanning, because I spent time in the utility space prior to coming to Ulteig, you think about the electric utility world specifically. And that world was designed, built, and lasted for decades as a space where you had centralized generation, oftentimes fossil or nuclear or hydro generation. And then you had major high voltage line bringing that generation to a population center. And then you distributed that electricity to the population center. And that generally was the system that worked for decades. Fast forward to where we are today, and we have a distributed energy system, which is so different than what was there in the past. We have certainly a lot of distributed resources on people's rooftops and people's neighborhoods and communities across Minnesota or the Midwest. But we also have distributed resources in the form of major wind, utility grade wind projects or utility grade solar projects, battery energy storage projects that are placed all over the United States or North America. And it takes new transmission to take those across long distances to where population centers need them. And at the same time, our electrical system is now a wholesale system that runs through markets, and that determines what level of power is needed at any given time and what the cost of power is going to be at any given time. So it's much more of a dynamic system than it ever was earlier in my career. And by the way, the same I think goes for some of the changes we've seen in the transportation system, some of the changes we've seen in the water system. The introduction of technology to the transportation system, into the water system, into the electrical system, has really transformed both the use and the supply of those critical resources.
One thing we've talked about, there was some discussion at the legislature about streamlining the process for reviewing and approving some of these projects. Any thoughts on that? And have you seen any progress in that direction?
Yeah, and that's on both the state and the federal level. It's a complicated situation, really. If you want to build new clean energy, as an example, you got to get in the queue to interconnect that clean energy to the transmission system. And getting in the queue can be problematic, but then once you're in the queue, having the transmission built to support that and take it to market is also challenging. You might remember, if you were around for these days in the early first decade of 2000s, CapEx 2020, a major transmission project that was a transmission overlay project that was built in the Midwest. I was at Xcel Energy at that time, and we were a big part of all of that. And in fact, this clock back here is a recognition of CapEx 2020. But it took us from the time we started conceiving all of that till the time the steel was in the ground and it was in use. It took 7, 8, 9 years to make that happen. I'd love to tell you that's changed, but it hasn't dramatically. Now, the state of Minnesota has done an awful lot to try to expedite permitting and to expedite key projects that are needed to support the advent and increase of renewable resources. The federal government has tried to create a backstop to make it happen, but it still takes time. It's still complicated. The number one issue for increasing energy capacity, especially clean energy capacity, is still availability of the grid. And that's going to get worse, Brian, because now with artificial intelligence, the amount of construction of data centers to support AI is growing dramatically, and the load needed to support those AI data centers is going to add demand to the electrical system beyond what we've seen in the last couple decades. So we're going to have to figure this out. We're going to have to figure out how to move more quickly on queue management and transmission build out.
Well, it sounds like you have your work cut out for you there. Can you talk a little bit about how your workload has held up and what your outlook is for the next 12 months or so?
Yeah, it's like I said on the front end of this, it's kind of a fun story. Ulteig, while we've been around for 80 years, in 2015, we had 300 to 350 employees. And we're an employee-owned firm. And our employee-owned firm has a board of directors, and our board of directors saw the opportunity to really bring somebody in who could create a new strategy, a new focus for the business, and build a leadership team that could sort of pop the cork on our ability to grow and harness the opportunity before us. So I had the opportunity to come in 2015. I came in, we created a leadership team to take the company forward. We had some work to do on making sure we had the right culture and investing in the people and the culture and building trust and creating the kind of environment where people really believed in themselves and believed in the company. And then we took off. And candidly, we're a bit in the catbird seat. Serving the power, renewable, transportation, and water market is a great place to be because the amount of growth in that space was by far surpassing most other infrastructure. And all we had to do was build a plan, create a great environment, get people to want to come be a part of the story and watch the company grow. And we've done that. So as I mentioned, we were 350 people back in 2015. We're 1,400 now. And Brian, it's not going to slow down. Right now, if you were to ask me, what are the two biggest constraints to our growth? I would tell you two things right now. One is the demand by far outweighs the supply. There aren't enough people to perform the work needed for these critical infrastructure projects. And then second of all, the evolution of digitization, automation, technology, and AI coming at us is creating both opportunity and challenge for us. And we can either embrace it or run from it. We're choosing to embrace it, but we got to be able to balance both bringing the people on and keeping them and creating a great environment while also investing in technology. And I think those two things are going to allow us to continue to grow.
Yeah, and that's a good segue for my next question about diversity, equity, and inclusion. DEI is top of mind, of course, for a lot of companies now, and it just pays to be more diverse. When people are challenged with finding the workers they need. And can you tell me a little bit about how your company is approaching that and how you're going about creating or improving diversity?
Yeah, this may sound a little kitschy, but I like to say we thought DEI was cool before others did. But in 2018-19, as we were growing, and there's only so many engineers in the Midwest and Rocky Mountain area, which is where we were primarily drawing our employees from, between Fargo and Denver and St. Paul. We decided to cast our net wider. We decided we needed to cast our net wider. And frankly, we were serving clients across North America who looked different than us, behaved different from us, had cultural backgrounds that were different than ours and experiences different than ours. So we started casting our net wide and hiring people outside of our normal area. This in and of itself created diversity among Ulteig's employee network. As we did that, we started to realize, now, wait a minute, we're going to also have to change the culture. We're going to have to create a culture that gives everybody a feeling of belonging, gives everybody a feeling of opportunity to grow equitably in their career here. And that's kind of when we started embracing not just diversity in creating a bigger pool of people, but also equity and inclusion to create an environment where everyone felt welcome and they could grow. It was interesting, about the time of the tragic George Floyd death in Minneapolis, and all kinds of other companies were signing on to the CEO DEI pledge. We were, in my opinion, we were still building our culture to be who we thought we should be from an equity and inclusion perspective. And I didn't want to sign that until I knew we really could commit to it. And we ended up signing it about 12 months later. But we were on that path because it was critical to our growth. And now looking back, it's critical to our culture. It's critical to who we are.
Yeah, it just makes good business sense for companies like yours where DEI isn't just a buzzword, but something you take seriously and help you create that workforce of the future. But can you tell me a little bit more about getting back to the anniversary celebration, the 80 years? Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And is the company planning any special events or recognitions or anything of that nature?
Yeah. We 5 years ago, we celebrated our 75th. And I don't know why, but 75s always seem to deserve all the attention over an 80. But 80 is pretty important. We did all kinds of fun things back at 75. What we're doing this year is we're going around to our larger locations. We have 15 offices, but of those 15 offices, some of them have more employees than others. So we're going around to each of those locations and we're throwing 80th anniversary celebrations. So as an example, next week I'll be up in Fargo celebrating with our 200 plus employees in Fargo, our 80th anniversary up there. We did one in Minneapolis a while back. We also did one in Denver a few weeks back, and other locations in between. And really what we're doing in these is we're bringing our employees together. We work in a hybrid work environment. So a lot of our employees don't see each other face to face very often. They certainly work in a team environment across virtual environments. But it's an opportunity to get them together, celebrate, recognize the great accomplishments. As an employee-owned firm, recognize the great accomplishments of the firm and the value that creates to everyone who's in an ownership position, which is all employees who work here, and have some fun. We throw a little party. We've developed, one of our employees developed he developed multiple recipes for both an alcoholic and a non-alcoholic cocktail in honor of our 80th anniversary. And then several employees went through and voted for their favorites. So we're serving that. We're serving lots of food and having a number of different sort of games and recognition events, and really just trying to acknowledge both our history and where we're going. One of the things that's really important to me is that we have a sustainable growth plan, that this isn't sort of flash in the pan. And we've been growing at about 24% a year for now the last 7 years on a compound annual growth rate. I don't know that we're going to continue to grow at 24% a year. It gets harder as you get bigger, right? But we are going to continue to outpace the industry in our growth. And to do that, we've got to acknowledge and recognize the people who come to work here every day to make it happen, and look for ways to get together, collaborate, celebrate, recognize, and have fun. And that's what these 80th anniversary parties are all about.
Mm. Yeah, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned hybrid work, and that, of course, made me think of COVID. How did COVID impact your company and the way you do business?
Yeah, like a lot of companies, I think looking back, we're quite surprised at how well we did with it. You know, if you would have told us or any other company, you need to figure out how everyone's going to go work from home, and you need to do that so that everyone's ready 6 months from now, we would have said, oh, it's going to take us 18 months to figure that out. Well, we figured it out overnight, right? As did everybody else. I would credit a lot to our IT infrastructure and to our IT organization that they had us ready. We didn't know we needed to be ready, but we were ready. And we did not have a single blip in our ability to be productive, our ability to connect. Yeah, everybody had to get set up in their homes, and yeah, everybody needed to make sure they had the right tools. But when we sent everyone home back on probably around March 16th or whatever it was of 2020, we didn't expect that they were going to be home, perhaps for good, certainly for months. And yet nobody missed a beat. Not a client requirement was missed. All of our service requirements were met. We continued to grow in our ability to bring value to the marketplace, and we continued to hire people. And that's when we really stepped into casting that net wider and hiring people from across North America as opposed to from our traditional footprint, because we realized people can work remotely and be just as effective on a team as they are anywhere else. Now, I will say this, going forward, we had to make sure everybody had the right tools. So we put in place, an allowance so that everybody could equip their home office with the right tools to be successful to work from home. We provided them all the technology tools to make sure they can work well from home. But then at the same time, collaboration is such a part of our culture. And in fact, one of our values is enthusiasm. And enthusiasm springs from passion, and passion springs from being together and feeling like you're part of something from a purpose perspective. And there is still some challenge, I believe, to two-dimensional collaboration and engagement. So we look for every opportunity we can to bring teams together physically and to get folks in the same room and spend a few days together to celebrate, recognize, and achieve together. And that's probably the one thing I'm most concerned about, is making sure we continue to invest in those collaboration opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing I remember from COVID is there was so much talk about projects being delayed or canceled, and of course the supply lines and things of that nature. Was that
Yeah.
you're in an industry where I assume that things kept moving forward pretty well. Is that fair?
To a large degree, if you think about the power industry needed to keep the lights on and needed to keep building the infrastructure. There were starts and stops, and a lot of it, as you say, was because of supply chain challenges.
Mhm.
In the transportation industry, it had a lot to do with federal funding and when that federal funding was going to be allotted. We had a lot of projects awarded that then were stalled, but they picked up. And in looking back, it probably meant quarterly delays for us as opposed to anything much more major than that. Renewable projects, the demand for electricity and the demand for clean energy, they just kept going. The biggest thing that challenges renewable projects is the tariffs associated with the equipment that they receive from outside the United States, the supply chain constraints, and then last of all, cost of money, cost of capital. And certainly that's been a little more challenging in the last 12 months, and we've seen that impact the start time of certain projects, but nothing that has caused us major issues or concerns.
Mm. Good to know. Well, I've really enjoyed our conversation, Doug. Very interesting, great insight into both opportunities and challenges in your industry. And any other thoughts that you'd care to share with us before I let you go?
Maybe just the last thing I'll say, and if we had a lot of time, Brian, to talk about this, we'd probably go here next. But sort of what's the secret sauce to our success is it's our people. It's our ability to cause Ulteig to be a destination employer and cause people to want to come work here. But even more so, it's our success in creating a culture and an environment where everybody feels like they can be successful and belong and contribute and grow. And I happen to think that kind of trusting environment and one where everybody feels like they're a part of the purpose is what makes us more successful. After all, we're a people business. We're a professional services business, and we could not have done it but for the 1,400 people who come to work here every day, believing in what they do. So that's what keeps me going, keeps me excited, and I really appreciate the time to spend a few moments with you to talk about Ulteig's success.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for mentioning that. That's a good insight for the day after Labor Day, I guess.
Yeah, very much so, right? It's all for the people that we are successful, and I tell our employees that every day. I say, in the end, we hire really smart people, and they share their goodness and their brains with our clients, and that's our service. That's our method to our madness here and how we serve our clients.
Well, great. Well, I really enjoyed our conversation, Doug. Thank you so much for joining me, and hopefully we can stay in touch.
Yeah, great meeting you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
Take care, Brian. See ya.
See you.